Geshe-ma. We're going to continue where Geshe-ma left off in the class last Sunday. And so we're continuing on our journey to understand just a little bit of the fundamental principles of Buddhist psychology. And we'll continue using the same text from the Master's Nalanda course that's produced by Tibet House. And what I thought we would do today is to start with a little review of some of the concepts that we covered in the last class. And then we're going to jump into finishing up with the topic of the mental direct perceivers. And then we'll cover the inferential cognizers and subsequent cognizers. So we're still in the sevenfold typology, the different types of consciousnesses. So that takes us through, subsequent cognizers was number 9. So we'll get through that today. And then the plan is for the next class. So we have 2 classes after this one. So just to give you the little roadmap here. In the next class, we will finish the remaining consciousnesses. So those were the correctly assuming consciousness, the non-discerning direct perceiver, the doubting consciousness, and the deceptive wrong consciousness. So those topics are somewhat less detailed. So we'll finish those like Sunday, and I think we'll even have a little time to start on mind and mental factors, which is a very powerful, valuable way of understanding this topic from a slightly different perspective. And so we'll spend all of March 1st, on the topic of mind and mental factors, and I hope to get a little bit into it next Sunday as well. So that's what we have planned for today. So the reason why we're looking at this very profound and beneficial topic of the mind is to better understand who we are. And that involves understanding how we experience, not just experience reality, but how we interact with objects and in a way create, our living experience, create our reality. Right? And so the way in which we understand ourselves, the understanding of what a person is on the basis of what we have been talking about as the collection of the 5 aggregates, right? And so just again, as a quick review, we talked about how these aggregates are the basis for labeling, this idea of a person. And 4 of these aggregates are material in nature, and 1 is mental, right? And so we had form, feeling, discrimination, miscellaneous factors or compositional factors, and primary consciousnesses, right? And so when we were reading the Heart Sutra just a minute ago, we went through, actually we named, each of these, no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, right? So we went through all of these. And so the Heart Sutra is talking about how, not that these aspects of a person, it's not that they don't exist at all, right? Because it says no form, no feeling, right? So you might think, well, they're saying that Buddha is saying that they don't exist at all, but that's not the case. What was teaching Buddha taught was that these do not exist inherently, right? There's no inherently existing form, no inherently existing feeling, no inherently existing discrimination, etc. So that's an important distinction. But before we can understand what that means, before we can really begin to tackle this idea of emptiness, of selflessness, right? First, we have to understand, what these objects are, even in at a conventional level. Right? So that's why it's so important to really study these topics. Okay, and so when we talk about, the selflessness of the person, right, we're starting with that. The selflessness of the person, there are essentially two different kinds, right? So the first would be the ordinary, conventional self, right? So each of us is an ordinary, conventional self, right? So we feel happiness, we feel joy, we feel pain, we feel pleasure. We have good days, we have not so good days, right? We have depression, we have ecstatic, states of mind, right? So the whole gamut, right? We have these ordinary, conventional, normal selves. But then the second kind, right? Second kind would be this false sense of self, this false self that does not actually exist. Okay, so His Holiness defines that type of self as a falsely imagined, overly concretized, or like overly reified. It's like a superimposition. So it's this state of existence that I've been referring to as inherent existence. Okay, so this inherently existence, something that can exist without depending on causes and conditions, right? In a nutshell. So there, just to reiterate, there are two kinds of self. So the ordinary, conventional self, and then this false sense of self that doesn't actually exist. Okay? So when we talk about a meditation on emptiness, selflessness, what we're trying to get at is really both. You have to understand how both of these are defined and how they interrelate. So the self, as we ordinarily think of ourselves, depends on both the physical form, like we were just talking about, as well as, the mental attributes, right? So that's why we were saying with the five aggregates, right? The form refers to color, shapes, sounds, odors, tastes, and tangibles, right? So our body has physical form, right? And then the mental will refer to all four of the remaining aggregates. So the key characteristic of each of these aspects, each of these aggregates, is that they're impermanent, right? Meaning that, that they're always in the process of change. From moment to moment, they're always changing. So impermanent is the key characteristic. And on the other hand, our minds are polluted with this ignorance. Okay, so ignorance, which causes us to believe the opposite. Okay, so it's ignorance that causes us to believe that things are inherently existent, that they're in a sense permanent, unchanging by nature. And so by extension, if the aggregates are inherently existent, then by extension, when you think of the person as a whole and phenomena as a whole, they're also understood as being inherently existent when our minds are polluted by ignorance. Okay? And so it's this mistaken belief, it's this ignorance that is the root of our suffering. Okay, so that's the the review of the context for this presentation. And then just to review a little bit of what we talked about for those of you who may have missed the last class, if we could take a quick look at slide 16, please. So we were talking about two different kinds of direct perceivers, right? And so direct perceivers as a whole, the definition is an awareness that knows its objects directly without a conceptual appearance of its observed object. So they don't involve, any type of thinking, imagining, remembering, right? So direct perceivers, again, it's an awareness, it's a consciousness that knows its object directly being the key term here, without a conceptual appearance, right? So that's the the main emphasis of this, the main point of this definition is without a conceptual appearance. So it's non-conceptual, to put it briefly. It's non-conceptual. Okay? Does that make sense?
Does that mean it's something that exists in form if it's non-conceptual?
Non-conceptual just means there's no thought involved in apprehending the object, in understanding, or yeah. So we have all of these phenomena, all these objects that are with us, all the time, right? So that's why we were talking about color, shape, sound, right? Objects of touch, like those all, we're bombarded by all of these objects around us, right? And then we have these sense faculties that are the conduit, maybe, the way in which those objects, are sort of direct, appear to us, yeah? So the eye faculty, the ear faculty, right? We went through all of those, right? So you've got the object, then you have its corresponding sense faculty or faculty that allows us to engage with that object. And then it's not just that very subtle sense faculty, but mental faculty, but also it's the associated consciousness, right? So you have all these things coming together in order for us to be able to interact with and apprehend these respective types of objects, right? So they're all like beautifully lined up and matched. There are all these relationships that make our experience possible, okay? So the first type of consciousness, then we're talking about the direct perceivers, right? When you go back to the list of the 7 types, right? Direct perceivers was the first kind. So within the category of direct perceivers, there are 2 types, right? There's the sense direct perceivers, which is what we've been talking about, and then the mental direct perceivers. Okay, so both of these are without conceptual appearance. Keep that in mind. Direct perceivers means non-conceptual, no thinking involved, right? And you'll understand that more clearly when we finish the sense direct perceivers. When we talk about mental direct perceivers, that'll be more clear. So slide 17, the sense direct perceivers, I think, are listed, right? And so the consciousness that's associated with each of those different aspects of experience, right? So so what we're going to talk about today then is mental direct perceivers. And mental direct perceivers are, again, they're defined. I think there's a slide for that. Did I put that up there? It's a non-mistaken, non-conceptual knower that arises from its own mental sense power as its uncommon empowering condition. Okay, so let's unpack that little definition. So non-mistaken, again, it means it's free from the 4 kinds of error that we talked about 2 classes ago. It's non-conceptual, and non-conceptual means that it's free of conceptuality, So that's different from saying that it's a consciousness that's completely free of thought itself. So that was interesting. So non-conceptual does not necessarily mean that it's, like entirely free of thought itself, which is what, we would ordinarily might think of the definition of non-conceptual as meaning. But to be more specific, it means being free. We're talking about mental direct perceivers, right? A mental direct perceiver is free of a conceptual consciousness that apprehends words and what the word refers to, the referent, as suitable to be associated. So a mental direct perceiver, just to repeat it, it's a conceptual consciousness that is, sorry, it is free of of a conceptual consciousness that would apprehend, that would think of words and their reference, right? We're talking about linguistic convention, the way in which we apply words to objects, right? So it's a conceptual consciousness. That type of conceptual consciousness does not occur in a mental direct perceiver. Okay, so we'll go through that in a little bit more detail later on. But so then a mental sense power, right? Mental sense power is the uncommon empowering condition. And so it's any of the 6 consciousnesses that immediately preceded it. Right? So the 6 consciousnesses would be the sense consciousnesses that we just talked about, right? The sense direct perceivers. Each one has an associated sense consciousness. And then the mental consciousness. Okay? So that's a mental direct perceiver. And there are 2 kinds of mental direct perceivers. These are interesting. So a mental direct perceiver that is indicated in the sutra, and then the other one is those that are not indicated in the sutra. And I don't know if this refers to a particular sutra or not. But anyway, so mental direct perceivers depending on the minds. This is the first type. So depending on the minds, meaning those induced by sense direct perceivers, apprehending any of the 5 sense objects, forms, sounds, odors, taste, or tactile objects. So that is to be differentiated from the second kind. Those are not indicated in the sutras. These are mental direct perceivers induced by states arising from meditation, such as the 5 clairvoyances. Okay, all of this is in the text, the Tibet House text. So that's the difference. The first is easier for us to understand, I think, because it's something that is part of our ordinary experience, right? So it's mental direct perceivers are, I was going to say triggered, but that's probably not a very good word. But so if you have a sense direct perceiver, right, and the object of a sense direct perceiver is going to be form, sound, odor, taste, right? But then that's going to be associated with, or it's related or corresponding, mental direct perceiver. Okay, so those 2 would go together. This second kind of mental direct perceiver is the result of meditation, right? So for ordinary beings, the ones that are listed here are attainable, right? Through lots of practice, lots of meditation, we can achieve these. So the clairvoyance of magical emanation, the clairvoyance of divine eye, divine ear, former lives, reading others' minds. I think there is a slide for this one. Wait, I'm going to go back and look at my slide deck because I forgot to put down all of the slide numbers. Where's it going? Here it is. Starting on number 15. Observed review. Oh, I had a quiz question in there. Yeah, so if slide 18. Slide 18 has the definition and then the list. Okay. So great. So as a result of your great efforts and profound, extensive meditation, spiritual practice, you too can develop the clairvoyances and magic emanations, divine eye. So in general, what we're saying with these capabilities, So magical emanations would be the ability to emanate, yourself, making many, many different copies of yourself, and sharing them or throughout the universe, throughout the different world systems, right? You can emanate yourself to go out there and do good things. And then divine eye and divine ear are the ability to see or hear extremely subtle, objects throughout the universes. The memory of former lifetimes would be the ability to remember what you did in, 5 years, not just 5 years ago, but 500 lifetimes ago. And then knowing others' minds would also be possible. So these are possible through for an ordinary being. So if an ordinary being can do this, then there are other types of clairvoyance that would be associated with Aryas and those beings who have even greater, much greater spiritual practices, realizations. Okay, so just something to aspire to. Okay, then the next kind of direct perceiver is the self-cognizant or self-knowing direct perceiver. So that's slide 19. So this is defined as a non-mistaken, again, non-conceptual knower that has the aspect of an apprehender. So apparently there are two kinds of consciousnesses. There are other knowers and self-knowers. Right? So this is one way of understanding consciousness. Okay, you can divide it into two. Say, break it into two based on the type of consciousness. Is it an other knower? Is it directed at external objects? Is that its field of expertise, so to speak? So the opposite would be a self-knower, where the consciousness is directed internally at your internal experience. Okay, so external meaning the other knowers, self-knowers being directed inwards, the internal experience. So for example, an example is an eye consciousness that's apprehending the color blue. So in this case, the other knower of the consciousness is the eye consciousness itself. Right? The eye consciousness itself is apprehending something external to it, which is the color blue, right? So it's directed outwards, so it's an other knower. And then the opposite is the self-knower. So this is really interesting. So a self-knower would be a consciousness. It's like a layer of abstraction higher. So it's a consciousness that experiences not the blue, right? But it's experiencing the eye consciousness itself. Okay, so it's like two layers of consciousness. You have that other knower, which was the eye consciousness itself, and then on top of that, you have this self-knower, which experiences that other knower. Okay. So when you think of the different, that's actually in accordance with the Sautantrika tenet school, and maybe even below it, everybody below Sautantrikas. Anyway, it's not a Prasangika tenet school position. They say that the self-knower is unnecessary. And they don't assert the existence of a self-knower. Anyhow, since this text is presented from the perspective of the Sautantrika school, that's why we're understanding it, why we're making an effort to become familiar with this distinction, right? So another way of understanding this relationship between the consciousness and its objects is that of an apprehended and an apprehender. Okay, so what is being apprehended? What object is being understood and gotten at? and who's doing that? Okay, so I think that's also very helpful way of thinking about this. So in that example that we were thinking about of a eye consciousness that's apprehending something that's blue, right? So what's the apprehended object? I just said it. Well, I'm just trying to make sure everyone's awake. Blue, right? Yeah, there you go, blue. So it's the blue. And then what is the apprehender?
Yeah, I.
Close. It's
The other knower?
yeah, right. So it's the eye consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. The eye. Yeah, just making it a little more specific, it would be the eye consciousness. And the eye consciousness is arising based on the input from the empowering condition, which was that eye sense faculty. So yeah, all good, great.
And then the self-knower can perceive both the blue and the eye consciousness perceiving the blue.
Or is it just the consciousness which experiences? I think it may just experience the other knower.
Okay.
But that's a good question. Let's see, do we have any more? Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so I think we got that. So just to, well, I'll just repeat it since I have it right here. So just to reiterate what we just talked about in terms of the relationship between the apprehended and the apprehender. So we're saying that the eye consciousness apprehending blue sees blue, right? Sees that color blue. And so that's why it is called that which has the aspect of the apprehended, right? The wording is just so clunky, but the opposite then is the consciousness which experiences that eye consciousness and sees the apprehender itself, right? Is that which has the aspect of an apprehender. Oh, right. So that's the self-knower. Right. Okay. Right. That's cool. Does that make sense? The eye consciousness apprehending blue sees the aspect of blue and is thus called that which has the aspect of the apprehended. So that would be the other knower. And then the self-knower is the consciousness which experiences that eye consciousness and sees the apprehender itself, and is thus called that which has the aspect of an apprehender. All right. So,
Vulnerable, may I ask you to repeat that? Because earlier there was someone sneezing, so I couldn't hear part of what you say.
oh, okay, I'm sorry. Let me just read this. This is from Lati Rinpoche's book, Mind in Tibetan Buddhism, on page, around page 59. And I have a slide at the end with all of the references, the titles of the books that I've used. So the eye consciousness apprehending blue sees the aspect of blue and is thus called that which has the aspect of the apprehended. Okay, the apprehended. So we're thinking that that is the eye consciousness itself. So that must be the other knower. And then the consciousness which experiences that eye consciousness sees the apprehender itself and is thus called that which has the aspect of an apprehender. Okay. So as a little recap, so for the self-knowers or self-cognizant direct perceivers, I think what we need to understand is, number one, the idea of the self-knower is only asserted by the Sautantrikas and maybe some of the other tenet schools, but it's not asserted by the Prasangikas. So if you're, studying this in the future, just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Understanding that there are two types of consciousness: the other knower, which is directed outside, the self-knower, which is always directed inside. And then this idea of understanding things in terms of an apprehended object as well as an apprehender, the agent that is understanding the type of consciousness that would be apprehending, not grasping it, apprehending, we'll just stick with apprehending the appearing object, okay? So then, where are we? Oh, 1044. Yogic direct perceivers would be the next kind of mental direct perceivers. So yogic direct perceivers is the last of the three subcategories for mental direct perceiver. Yogic direct perceivers, this is on, if you're following Geshe, the Tibet House PDF, that we're now on page 25. And we're on slide 20. So again, this is just good to know about. If you do lots of practice in an unmistaken way, you too will achieve these these abilities, right? So yogic direct perceivers is probably not something that the average person, average practitioner can access, but it's a non-mistaken, non-conceptual exalted knower, and exalted knower, in the continuum of a superior, like an Arya being, that is produced from a meditative stabilization, which is a union of calm abiding and special insight, and which has become its own uncommon empowering condition. This is just so cool. So these are mental in nature. Yogic direct perceiver is a mental consciousness, right? So it's in the continuum of highly realized practitioners. So it's broken into 4 types. The first is, you can think about these yogic direct perceivers from the viewpoint of the person who possesses it. So hearers, solitary realizers, and Mahayanists. That's probably not the best term, but anyway. So these are different types of practitioners who are following the path, right? Hearers, solitary realizers, Mahayanists. Right, so without going into too much detail, that's one way of thinking about yogic direct perceivers. So in terms of who possesses them, so all of these types of realized beings are going to be able to have this type of mental direct perceiver in their continuums. Then likewise, you could think of them from the perspective of their entities. So somebody who is a practitioner who has attained the path of seeing, right? So they have realized emptiness directly. Somebody who has attained the path of meditation, somebody who has achieved the path of no more learning, then they would have these mental direct perceivers. Okay? So they've, yeah, I'm not going to go, okay. Then from the viewpoint of their aspects, then one can, the quote is, I'm just reading this, one can posit 16 kinds of yogic direct perceivers, having the aspects of 16 attributes of the Four Noble Truths, such as impermanence, suffering, emptiness, selflessness, and so forth. So there would be a mental direct perceiver for each of the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. And then finally, from the viewpoint of having the aspect of the realization of, from the viewpoint of having the aspect of coarse and subtle selflessness. Okay, so so I think that's important to understand in terms of aspects of mind, aspects of consciousness, which maybe it's something to aspire to, right? To think, well, as I continue to practice, then my mind will become increasingly more and more powerful, and I'll be able to attain, more subtle types of awareness of consciousnesses, and that's something to aspire to, right? And it's not just something to aspire to for yourself, but like you can think of other practitioners. You can think of all of the lineage lamas, all of the other highly realized beings who have traversed this path, and so now we have a better understanding of what their minds are like, what their realizations have involved, and so we have a little bit of a better sense, at least at the intellectual level, of what they're all about. So I find that very, very inspiring. It increases our faith and our devotion in our practice. Yep. Okay, so let's see, we're at 10:50. Yeah, so we're gonna just keep cruising on here. I hope this is interesting. It's a little bit dry, but I think when you understand the significance of understanding this subject, right, then hopefully will inspire you to continue learning. So the next slide is inferential cognizers. So finally, well, I'll just read this first. It's a determinative knower, which by depending on a correct sign as its basis is incontrovertible with regard to a hidden phenomena as its object of comprehension. So I'm going to unpack that for a second, and then I'm going to give you His Holiness's definition, which is easier to understand. But I wanted to give you the one that's in the book. So a determinative knower is refers to something involving conceptual analysis, right? So it's a conceptual type of mind. Correct sign means correct reasoning, logic. Incontrovertible is a fancy word for, basically saying unmistaken. Okay. So, in other words, it does involve conceptual thought and reasoning, and the object is a hidden phenomenon. Okay. So it's something that is not immediately apparent to the sense. Direct perceivers, right? So it can only be understood through the application of logic and reasoning. Okay? So, so inferential cognizers, that category of consciousness is directly opposite to the one we just studied, right? To the direct perceivers. Yeah. So, and then when you think of our experience, right, just at a very gross level, right? If we really had to break things down very, quick and dirty or whatever it is, that makes sense, right? So we've got the direct perceivers, and then we've got, which are non-conceptual in nature, and then we have the inferential cognizers, where we do all of our analysis and reasoning, and we do that all the time. Discrimination, right? You pick up your cup. Oh, it's heavy. Well, that is not just a physical. So you've got the direct physical sensation of the weight of the cup, right? You pick this thing up, and there's an experience. That tactile interaction with the object is going to say, oh, there's something there. Oh, it's, sending feedback to the tactile sense consciousness. Right? And then, immediately afterwards, you have this whole realm of inferential cognition, right? All that type of awareness of processing, so to speak, comes in, that's where you start saying, oh, it's a little bit heavy, but it's not as heavy as, picking up a 10-pound weight, right? Etc. Okay. So His Holiness says an inferential cognizer is an awareness, right? It's an awareness that correctly understands, it's unmistaken, correctly understands its observed object, whatever that might be, through a conceptual appearance, a mental image of its object, and by means of an inference. Okay. So, inference in the sense of a correctly stated reason, correctly formulated reason and logic, okay? So it's an awareness that correctly understands its observed object through a conceptual appearance, a mental image of its object, and by means of an inference. So I think we talked in the first or second class in the series about meaning generalities, right? Sound generalities, meaning generalities, and that idea of those two being related in a very close manner. So when we talk about a mental image, that's what we're talking about. Okay, so the difference between the inferential cognizers and the direct perceivers that we were just talking about is that you have, in the case of the inferential cognizers, the access to the object that you're trying to get at is always through this layer, this abstraction, this layer of mental processing. It's that generic image, okay? So and what we're saying is that, like you're never, through an inferential cognizer, you're not seeing the object directly, right? It's always through this layer of conceptuality. So it's like, oh, I'm looking at this cup. Well, the minute, I'm not just saying looking at the object, I'm saying, oh, it's a cup. Why is it a cup? Because I'm coming up with the definition of cup, right? So it's that kind of like a two-step process, but it's not two steps, but you're always seeing things through the lens, so to speak, of conceptuality, right? So that's a very, very important difference between the inferential cognizers and the direct perceivers. Okay, so just remember, we're talking about conceptual appearance, meaning that mediation through a mental image. Okay. So we can go back and talk about that a little bit later, but if you want to go back and review that definition, that would be good. Okay. So 3 categories that fall under inferential cognizers, the 3 types. Again, this is in the Tibet House handout. Based on, and I'll just rattle these off, based on the power of fact, based on or through confidence or belief, and then through renown or conventions. I think it's definitely easier to understand that as convention instead of renown. Okay. So each of these are important to understand. So Lati Rinpoche says that based on the power of the fact, proves a slightly hidden phenomena. And by that, it's something that can't be accessed directly through the sense perceivers alone. So it requires conceptual processing, conceptual thought. And so the example would be something like subtle impermanence. So something you have to think about, okay? Whether it's hot or cold, well, I don't know. So it proves a slightly hidden phenomena. And what's important is that power of the fact means that it's a type of awareness that comprehends a meaning that is found in the object itself. Okay. And so he talks about there being 2 kinds of objects. So here's another way of understanding objects, dividing it into those that are established by the thing itself, by the nature of the thing itself, and those that are established by worldly convention. Okay, so examples of the first, so something that's established by the thing itself, by its very nature, would be fire and let's say fire. So the nature of fire is, what's the nature of fire? Hot and burning, right? Something like that, hot and burning. So, no matter what that's the definition of fire, right? It's hot and it burns. Or the nature of sound, nature of, not just sound, but anyway, the traditional example is the nature of sound is, it's not just loud or soft or beautiful. It's
Vibration.
Vibration. It's a vibration, and yeah, and it's also it changes, right? So it's impermanent, right? Lots of things are impermanent, but anyway, so nature of sound is impermanent. So all of those are examples of things that are the nature of an object. Of an object itself. And the opposite would be something that could be changed, in the future, because it's the result of people agreeing to call something something, right? So it's a worldly convention, like a linguistic convention. So a name and an object, are paired, right? People agree that this is called, what's it called? It's called a MacBook, right? Or it's called a computer, or it's, whatever, however subtle you want to get in terms of, or however specific you want to get, right? Everybody agrees that this is some kind of computer. It's not a frog, right? So it's linguistic convention. So the terminology, could change, that label could change, over time, as other objects come into existence, similar objects come into existence, or as, maybe this thing gets so damaged to the point that it's no longer functioning as, it's no longer a computer, right? It's just a pile of broken parts. So that's the difference. Okay, so two kinds of objects, one that's established by the thing itself, those and others, the second is established by convention, right? So that's, I think, also a very interesting way of slicing and dicing how we think of objects around us. Right? So I'm bringing these up because these slightly more subtle, well, I don't know, just more. Anyway, I just want to emphasize these different ways of calling out different types of objects, because as we're meditating, as we go about our daily lives, it's good to try to just stop and again watch the way in which our minds are interacting, with things around us, because we're doing this all the time, and it's good to be aware of it, because being able to step back and watch the way in which we think, right, then helps us question who we are, helps us question this idea of a permanent, independently existent self. Yeah? Okay. So then the second kind, that was based on the power of effect. The second kind of, where are we, mental direct perceiver, is the, inferential cognizer is through confidence. Oh no, that's not right. Yeah, let's just say through belief, okay? Through belief. The object that we're getting at through this type of inferential cognizer is a very hidden phenomena, and a very hidden phenomena, something that, we cannot access otherwise, without this, more refined type of inferential cognizer. The example that's always given is karma, right? Karma at a very subtle level is very hard to understand, So the way in which, or the reasons why, something is happening to a particular person at a particular time, right? So if you read like the Jataka tales, there's these beautiful, life stories of the Buddha, and then there's these very complicated stories, and then, at the end, the protagonist, will say, well, why did that happen? Ask the Buddha or some Bodhisattva, like, why did this happen? And then because, they have this type of inferential cognizer, actually they have omniscience, but anyway, they would be able to perceive, the karmic causes and for a particular incident. Okay, so the definition here is a determinative knower, which by dependence on a correct sign of confidence or belief as its basis is incontrovertible, is unmistaken with regard to a very hidden phenomena. Okay, so it's just saying the same thing. Then the last one is the inferential cognizer through convention is again a determinative knower, which by dependent on a correct sign or correct reason as its basis is unmistaken with respect to a terminological suitability as its object. Okay, this one was very interesting. Not that the others weren't, but it's talking about again this focus on language and convention. So Lati Rinpoche says that it has to do with how we label things, how we name things, and how we all kind of agree on that as a relationship. So he says, like, for example, you could use this if you put this in a syllogism form, the subject, Hugo, is suitable to be expressed with the term moon, M-O-O-N, because it exists as an object of thought, right? So you would think, what? Like a person named Hugo could be expressed with the term like moon, and you're thinking moon, what do you mean moon? That has a totally different definition. But because it exists as an object of thought. So what we're saying here actually is that the term itself, whether you call it Hugo or you call it a moon or you call it, soup crackers, doesn't matter, right? The point is just that something that is known through convention, talking about the fact that things can be labeled is because they exist as an object of thought, right? It's something that we can apprehend through thought. It's an existent object. So the point being that the name itself, right, it doesn't come embedded in the object. It's not part and parcel, with the object itself, right? So that's why you could call, someone named Hugo, you could equally call that person John or, Maureen, or you could go, that's not in, somebody's not born, right? You're not born with your name. I think that's what we're trying to say in a very simplistic way, right? That name itself is not inherent in the object, right? It's just a verbal convention, it's a name that the parents, gave to the kid, and then everybody else, with teachers and everybody else agreed to call, the person Hugo. Hugo's kind of a funny name, right? Nobody's called Hugo anymore, right? But my brother just got a puppy and he named the dog Hugo. That's funny. Even for a dog, that's kind of odd. Hugo. We spent so much time talking about like, oh, what would we name the new pup? We ended up with Hugo. Anyway, it's a very cute dog. And it can be changed, right? So we're talking about something that's agreed upon by convention. And so, Hugo, maybe they decide they don't like the name Hugo and they come up with something better in the future, right? And so just a minute ago, we were talking about the opposite case where the nature of fire is hot and burning. And so that's not something agreed upon by convention. That's something that's inherent, that is kind of baked into the object itself. Okay? That can't be changed. The nature of water is to be, moist, right? The nature of a rock is to be, I don't know, hard or something. So the key point here is that, again, that idea of this, the phrase, the suitability of an object of thought to be named, okay? So that's what we're looking at, something being named by convention. The point is not that the name, is in any particular case. It's not that the name is correct. That's not what we're talking about, okay? It's the suitability of an object of thought to be named. That's what we're talking about when we're looking at inferential cognizers, the third type, through convention. Okay, that's the type of determinative knower that we're talking about. Okay. Okay. So the final topic that we're going to look at is the subsequent cognizer. So now we're looking at perceivers in terms of time, essentially in terms of time. So there's a difference between what's known as a prime cognizer, that's like time 0, and the subsequent cognizer would be like time 1, or time 2, time 3, right? T0, T1, T2, T3, right? So the definition of a subsequent cognizer is a knower which is not a prime cognizer, and which realizes what has already been realized by the former prime cognizer inducing it, or that causes it. It's also defined as a knower which realizes that which has already been realized. That's probably easier to understand. Okay, so subsequent cognizer. So really it is in terms of time, right? So whereas the first two categories, direct perceivers and then the inferential cognizers, were based around this idea of conceptuality, of whether a conceptual appearance has any role in that type of perceiver. Here we're talking about, for subsequent cognizers and prime cognizers, this is in terms of their cause and effect relationship, in terms of as understood in terms of time, okay? So there's a direct, there are two kinds. Yep, two kinds. Direct subsequent cognizer and a conceptual subsequent cognizer, right? So that's why So a direct subsequent cognizer then is, just like we were talking about the direct perceivers, and there were 4 kinds. So it's exactly the same for the subsequent cognizers. Direct subsequent cognizers, they have the same 4 breakdowns: the sense, mental, self-knowing, and yogic, right? We just went through those. So this isn't a big surprise. This is easy, right? So for a direct subsequent cognizer, for the sense consciousness, so it would be, what's an example of a sense consciousness?
Nose.
Huh?
Nose.
Your nose? Okay, smell? Okay. So if the first moment, the prime cognizer is that first moment of experiencing olfactory consciousness of smell, so then for the subsequent cognizer, it would just be the second moment of experiencing the smell, right? So easy. Then for the mental perceiver, this one's not so easy, because it's different based on whether or not the person who's experiencing this type of mental direct subsequent perceiver well, here they use cognizer, whether it's an Arya being or whether it's an ordinary being. For us as ordinary beings, a mental direct perceiver, right? That itself, is said to be extremely, extremely short, and so there is no second moment. There is no subsequent cognizer for an ordinary being, right? So just kind of file that away in a corner of your mind. But for an Arya being who's highly advanced, then apparently there is a second moment apprehending, whatever it is, a second moment apprehending form, a second moment apprehending sound, etc. Okay, so that's for the mental direct subsequent cognizers. Okay, and then just quickly for the self-knowing, the second moment of a self-knower experiencing a second a sense direct perceiver apprehending a form. Okay, so it's just like we were talking about before, the second moment of the self-knower, whatever that is experiencing. Okay, and then the yogic direct subsequent cognizer would be, let's say that particular type of perception was apprehending a tomato, or, well, no, actually, I shouldn't joke, because the yogic direct perceivers, they're objects of comprehension, they're objects of experience, is the very hidden phenomena. So it would be like not tomatoes, the selflessness of the tomato. Okay. So those are the direct subsequent cognizers, and then not to be confused with the conceptual subsequent cognizers, right? So conceptual subsequent cognizers, two kinds. It's like two of everything. So direct perception and inference. So direct perception, which we will talk about in the next class. Direct perception is a consciousness ascertaining the color blue, which is produced subsequent to a direct perceiver apprehending blue. Oh, because it's right, the conceptual subsequent cognizer. Right, so this makes sense. So direct perception, if you have a direct perception of an object such as blue, then that subsequent cognizer would have to be the second moment of that direct perception. So it would be the thought or like awareness that says thought awareness that says, okay, I saw blue. And then the second kind is inference. So that was direct perception. The second one is inference. So it's the second moment of an inferential consciousness or inferential cognizer realizing that sound is impermanent. So that makes sense. So in everything that we've talked about, it's just that second moment that's of cognition. In this case, it's conceptual, right? In the first case, when we were talking about the direct subsequent cognizer, those four types, that was non-conceptual. So that's not so hard. Some of this, especially when you're reading it and you're looking at, when you have it in written form, you just think about it a few more times and it's actually not that hard. I think my presentation may be helpful in terms of going through the material, but really what you need to do is just sit down and read it over and over and over again, and you'll be fine. Okay, and then one last point before we do a quick recap that I think will be helpful. So we were talking about prime and subsequent cognizers. So as I said, the prime refers to the very first moment of that consciousness, and the subsequent to that is the second and the following moments. But what I wanted to point out is that these are in the same continuity of that consciousness, right? So that's the relationship between all of these, very subtle moments of consciousness, right? So you've got the prime, that very first moment, but then all of these subsequent moments, these subsequent cognizers, all form part of the same continuum, right? It's not like, so that's important to understand. So the objects themselves, right? We talk about, because the doubt might arise. You might say, well, the objects of consciousness themselves are new in the sense that they're changing from moment to moment. In that sense, they're impermanent, right? They're new. But so where is this sense of continuity, coming from? So we're saying that prime cognizers is the difference, or the relationship between the prime cognizers and the subsequent cognizers is such that the prime cognizer is that very first moment, right, that engages the object, no matter what it is. Let's say it's the smell of a fragrance of a flower, right? And the key point is that the prime cognizer arises almost from its own power, right? It's that initial woof. Okay, I didn't see that in the book, but it arises from its own power, and the relationship between that and the subsequent cognizers is that the subsequent cognizers realize, their objects, that second moment of awareness, right? That is driven, or is a result of the force of the former primary or prime cognizer that induced them, that generated them, that gave rise to them. Okay. So I thought that was really interesting. So again, that's in Lati Rinpoche's book. So just to repeat it, so this idea of a prime cognizer, here is the sense that this very first moment of a consciousness, engaging the object, that very the very first moment occurs, through its own power, so to speak. But then for the subsequent cognizers, then that occurs through the force of that former prime cognizer. Okay, so you don't have to do it all over again. I think that's the point. So here you are, with the prime cognizer, it apprehends the object, and then for time 2, time 3, right? The subsequent moments don't have to they just kind of, it's all in the same continuity, right? So those subsequent moments are just going to be the result of that initial apprehension, that initial engagement. Okay. And I think, I'm sure there's a more detailed explanation in, not so much, I don't think Lati Rinpoche went into it in that much more, but I think that would be a fascinating thing to look into a bit more. Okay, so a little review here, because we went through a lot of information very, very quickly today. So we talked about 3 types of cognizers. There were 3 what's the first one? The very, very first one. We talked about it actually in the previous class. Starts with a D, direct perceivers. This is open book. The second one that we talked about, the second big category, what's the opposite of direct perceivers is?
Indirect perceiver?
Yeah, or inferential.
Inferential.
Okay, yep. And then the third, in terms of timing, you had the prime cognizers, and then you have the Subsequent, yeah,
Subsequent,
okay, yeah, close
subsequent.
enough. It starts with an S. We're good with that. Subsequent cognizers. Okay, so those are the big three that we talked about. So these are all within the sevenfold typology. We've done 3 out of 7. And within, going back to like within the direct perceivers, you can think of this is broken out into 2 main categories. The first is sense, right? Sense direct perceivers apprehend the 5 sense objects. What was the second kind? If the first is sense, the second's got to be mental, right? And there were 4 kinds of mental. Then under inferential cognizers, what was the type of object that's understood or apprehended by an inferential cognizer?
Conception.
Right, okay, so it gets at its objects through conceptual, thought, right? That's for sure. And it's not going to be apprehending, like sense objects instead. So it's going to be something that requires logic and reasoning and that type of conceptual thought. So like those are known as hidden objects, a hidden object, like subtle impermanence or something that you have to think about. It's not immediately obvious, like through the sense doors, right? And there were 3 kinds, fact, belief, or convention. That's what we were just talking about. And then the subsequent cognizers, does anybody want to define a subsequent cognizer or?
Cognition after a direct perception.
After a prime cognizer, because, right. Because there are 2 types. It could be subsequent cognizers could either be direct subsequent cognizers, yeah, or the conceptual subsequent cognizers. So subsequent, as a way of understanding these types of awarenesses, that it would apply to both the direct perceivers and then the inferential cognizer. Okay, so it's like just another spin on understanding these types of cognizers. Okay, so we're going to do a 2-minute meditation. You get 2 minutes of peace and quiet to let all of this soak in, right? So this is the 2-minute express check-in, and let's just see content analysis. You sit down, you're doing your little meditation practice. For the first couple of minutes, what do? You check in, you see what's going on in your mind, right? Take a few deep breaths, and then we're just going to stop. And this is an analytical meditation in the sense that we're going to apply what we just talked about. Whatever you think, whether it's, I'm feeling hot. Okay, well, what kind of consciousness is that? What kind of object is that? What's the, how are you experiencing it? And what is it related to? Right? So break it down first into physical versus mental, and then if it's mental, go through these different types of ways of classifying this awareness, this consciousness. Okay. So your homework is for the next week, for the rest of your life, to do that type of meditation on a daily basis, even just for a few minutes, even throughout the day, right? You don't have to be sitting on your meditation cushion. Just check in and see, how do these types of consciousnesses arise? Become more aware of them, use them to your advantage. Okay, so then the last slide in the slide deck is the references. If you would like a copy of these slides, feel free to reach out by email. My email address is Tendrol, Tendrol 108 @gmail.com.
Anila,
Uh-huh.
if you want, I can post the slides with the course description. It's up to you.
The only thing is I'm updating it every
That's fine.
class.
Okay. Just trying to make it easier. Totally fine.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the offer. That's very sweet of you. Very sweet of you. Very kind.
Venerable Tendrol, can you give the email again on the chat group, please?
I just put it
Oh,
back.
okay, got it. I see it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, and then the just a couple of the dedication prayers. So we're on page 15 of the PDF.
This crown.
We'll go down to Gewadi, due to this virtue. Due to this virtue, may I quickly become a Guru Buddha and lead all transmigratory beings, without exception, to that state. May the precious Supreme Bodhicitta, not yet born, arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. And then for His Holiness, in this land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Okay, so that's it for today.
Thank you, Anila.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
So much.